I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 62 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages, pursuant to Standing Order 1083 and the motion adopted by the committee on April 21st, 2023. The committee is meeting to continue its study on increased Francophone immigration to Canada. I would like to inform the committee that all MPs and witnesses have completed the required login tests prior to the meeting. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to pass on a few instructions to witnesses and MPs. Before speaking, please wait for me to call your name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. Please mute yourself when not speaking. Concerning interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between Floor, English, or French. For those who are in the room, you can use the earpiece to select the desired channel. Please note that all comments from members and witnesses must be addressed to the chair. I would now like to welcome our witnesses as individuals. We have Anne-Michelle Meg, former Director of Planning and Accountability, Department of Immigration, Francisation, and Integration from the Government of Quebec, and she is online. From the Francophone Welcome Center of Manitoba, we have Bintou Sako, Director. And we have from the Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada, we have Yves-Gérard Mécoloko, the Vice President, as well as Alain Dupuis. We also have Ms. Rukia Abdiaden, the Manager for Employment. So before we begin, we will give witnesses 5 minutes each for their opening speech. I will let you know when you're running out of time, but I'm very strict with time because we have a lot of witnesses and a lot of questions, and we want everyone to be able to ask their questions. So please don't take it badly if I interrupt you around the 5-minute mark. So we will begin with our first witness speech, Ms. Meggs, for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's always an honor and a privilege to appear before you. Since our last meeting in April on this same matter, there have been a number of important events and decisions. On the federal side, Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act, was passed by the House of Commons. Congratulations, I know you worked very hard. On the Quebec side, the reform of the Charter of the French Language was adopted and is now being implemented. And just recently, the Minister of Immigration, Francisation, and Integration announced their own initiatives concerning immigration and the French language. This morning, I would like to draw your attention to a specific commitment in Bill C-13. namely that the Government of Canada is committed to protecting and promoting the French language, recognizing that French is in a minority situation in Canada and North America due to the predominant use of English, and is committed to promoting French. The bill even recognizes the necessity of promoting and protecting the French language in each province and territory, and states that every federal institution must avoid or at least mitigate the direct negative impacts of this commitment in carrying out its mandate. If there's one area where recognizing the importance of protecting the French language in Quebec has been clear over the past over 50 years, it's immigration. The preamble of the Colin-Couture Agreement, signed in 1978 by Canada and Quebec, recognizes that immigration should contribute to Quebec's social and cultural enrichment, taking into account its specifically French character. The Meech Lake Accord incorporated the principles of this agreement and went even further. It provided that Canada could conclude an agreement on immigration with Quebec, and that it would provide an undertaking by Canada to withdraw services from the linguistic and cultural integration of all immigrants wishing to settle in Quebec where those services are provided already by Quebec. The Canada-Quebec Accord on Immigration, signed in 1991, is still in force today and implements this undertaking. Immigration is a shared jurisdiction in the Constitution, and the Accord sets out each government's role in this area. The Accord has a quasi-constitutional status in that it cannot be amended without the consent of both governments. We now have a reform on the Official Languages Act that states that the federal institutions must avoid initiatives that might have negative impacts on the commitment to protect the French language in each province. We also have a Canada-Quebec Accord on immigration that clearly aims to protect Quebec's specifically French character. I would like to make one last point to complete the picture outside of the legislative context. English is not only predominant in Canada and North America. The number of English speakers in the world is 1.3 billion and is almost 5 times greater than the number of French speakers at only 277 million. The pool for recruiting French speakers from abroad is therefore 5 times smaller. It will never be easy to attract enough immigrants to maintain the demographic weight of French speakers, whether that's in Quebec, outside Quebec, or in Canada as a whole. Moreover, it will always be easier to obtain permanent residency in a province other than Quebec. While selection is done by Quebec, admission is done by the federal government. Federal policies and administrative decisions, however, on immigration limit Quebec's appeal and may draw French-speaking immigrants with temporary status in Quebec to another province to apply for permanent residency. I named a few last year. I could provide you with more examples during the question and answer period if you're interested in this. This approach may help meet Francophone immigration targets outside Quebec, but such measures go against the spirit and letter of Bill C-13, and certainly against the spirit and objectives of the Canada-Quebec Accord. Francophone immigration is critical for the entire Canadian francophonie. Thank you for listening to me, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Ms. Meggs. You didn't go over time. We will now move on to Francophone Welcome Center of Manitoba. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. I'd really like to thank you for having invited me to appear today. As it was indicated, my name is Ms. Sacco, and I am with Accueil Francophone in Manitoba. So one of our priorities is taking care of the Francophone population in Manitoba. We have 3 objectives. So I'm going to keep things really tangible in this speech. So we need consular services abroad to work with the immigration pool in these countries. So over the last several years, we have seen that some visa offices as well as commissioners in Canada, serve a large number of countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. For example, in Dakar, 16 countries, and in France, a large number as well. When we look at international students and Francophone immigrants, 82% have been served by the office in Dakar. And about 75 to 80% come from Africa. So this plays a big role in the appeal of coming to Canada and recruitment in these areas. So I think it's really important that the Government of Canada implements tangible actions to make these embassy and consular services more accessible in sub-Saharan Africa. So we need more consular services, and we need to be able to process more applications in sub-Saharan Africa for visas. And we need to have more employees in these offices in Africa. And we need to ensure that they have experience in those communities so that they can properly help these Francophone immigrants. And then we need to look at the criteria. We need to get rid of certain arbitrary criteria to make sure that the IRCC is working effectively in Francophone communities. I think that this will help us to increase the number of applications from Francophones that are being accepted. In terms of temporary residence in Canada, this is an important pool. I think that we need to look in a tangible manner at the permanent residency program to remove certain obstacles such as the language test for those who have received a university degree in Canada and those who work in a Francophone environment. They actually have to take a test that they pay for to get their permanent residency. So we want to create different opportunities to help people become permanent residents during their last year of university study so that they can stay in the country. And then in terms of asylum seekers who are French-speaking, we need to be working with the international communities to create clear pathways for immigrants to come to Canada when they have degrees in certain fields such as medicine, accounting, engineering, and education. Concerning resources and services that need to be implemented to improve settlement services, the International Settlement Organization has been working for 3 years on a national coordination strategy for Francophone immigration, and we will be tabling recommendations to the IRCC very soon on solutions for the settlement field. So we're trying to take into account a by and for immigrants system, and we will be offering tangible recommendations. 15 seconds. So we want to improve the number of applications that are being accepted. We have a 15-year plan that we are going to implement that affects consular services as well as education on fair recruitment in African French-speaking countries as well as other countries. Thank you very much, Ms. Sacco. You will be able to share more during the question period. We are now going to hear from the Francophone and Acadian Association of Canada. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, honourable members of the committee, I would like to thank you for inviting us to appear today. Firstly, I'd like to underline just how much we appreciate the work that has been done by this committee. So recently, on Bill C-13, the work of all these parties has created a wonderful bill. Concerning Francophone immigration, this organization has always been supporting Francophone immigration, as you have. So in Bill C-13, we are committed to increasing the democratic weight of our French-speaking communities. You chose 1971 as a reference point. You have the political will, the legislative framework, and new regulatory means to establish this. Now, is it enough? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We met the 4.4% target very recently. And over the last decade, the government had struggled to meet this target. Before 2019, we had rarely gone past a 2% target. This committee did a study on Francophone immigration targets, and this study showed that even if the government met this 4.4% target again in 2023, 2024, and the following years, well, the decline in the demographic weight would continue. Our study also shows that anything below 10% would, at best, maintain the demographic weight. But if we want to increase this demographic weight, we require, starting 2024, to meet a 12% target. And then we would slowly increase this to get to 20% in 2036. This would allow us to reestablish the democratic weight of Francophone and the Acadian population as it was in the past, that being 4.4%. In 2036, we would need to meet the targets of the Official Languages Action Plan, and following that, we would have to implement the reform document on official languages that was published by the government in 2021. Now, on the other hand, we would not even make it to the 6.1% of the reference year of Bill C-13, that being 1971. And this is important to keep in mind because this 12 to 20% progressive target can seem significant, but this is simply because we need to catch up a lot. There have been 20 years of stagnancy in terms of Francophone immigration. And we also need to keep in mind that we didn't invent these numbers. We have done a population study with the FCFA, and we looked at statistical models that predict the future. And we take into account information from the government. So how would we meet a 12% target, given that it took so long for the government to meet current targets? Well, it's a simple answer. We need to implement a series of specific measures for Francophone immigration. We have the political will, but what we're missing is the tools to implement this. We would have to change programs such as Express Entry. We do not need to see minority community immigration the same as generalized immigration. It's two different things. We need specific measures that take into account the specific realities of Francophone communities. And we need to be looking at immigration pools throughout the world that are French-speaking. Some recommendations. Firstly, the Government of Canada needs a Francophone immigration program that is holistic and that takes into account the specific situation of the Francophone communities. And this needs to be enhanced and allowing the French community to participate directly. We would like to see the government to create a distinct Francophone immigration program for those French speakers outside of Quebec. This would allow French-speaking minority communities to participate in the recruitment and selection of French-speaking immigrants. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meulakou. Now let's go to the last witness. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak before you and to talk about economic integration of Francophone immigrants. We have members from 9 provinces and the 3 Canadian territories. We are educating them, mobilizing them, and supporting them in recruiting the talent and skills found in Francophone immigrants. This is not a simple task as we work with small and very small businesses. If we look at statistics from 2020, there were almost 1.22 million businesses in Canada were small businesses. It means that most of these businesses only have 2 to 3 employees. This is very hard. These businesses don't always have the tools needed to recruit locally or internationally. They don't necessarily have the resources to welcome newcomers in their company. We are also very pleased about reaching the target of 4.4%. Now we need to make sure that we're keeping this target going. This is extremely important since the Minister for Immigration announced a 1.2 million Francophone immigrants target in Canada. We need to revisit the system in order to recruit more Francophone immigrants. The network hopes that this modernized system will include a selection process that will focus on skills needed on the labor market and not necessarily on education. I am an immigrant. I arrived in Canada more than 20 years ago, and I can still see that the same challenges for immigrants. Immigrants face the first Canadian experience. Over the last few years, there have been discrimination issues in the workplace. These challenges are the same as the challenges faced by other immigrants. However, the Francophone settlement services are not as developed as other services because they are new, because the funding they get is based on the number of candidates we get. It means that if we get fewer Francophone immigrants, we'll get less funding. As a service provider, I understand that we're not always able to offer equitable services to Francophone immigrants. On international recruitment, we were able to work on a strategy to recruit internationally. We are recruiting in Francophone pools. First of all, we need to identify the employer's need. We need to educate employers. As I told you before, many Canadian employers are from small businesses. They are scared of looking internationally. We need to help them. Then we need to implement a Francophone pool recruitment process. We need to work with employers. We also need to better match candidates. We need to make sure that they are matched with available employers. You have 30 seconds left. No matter what the problem is, when immigrants get to Canada, they need to have access to comprehensive programs that will help them integrate. We need to make sure that they can be recruited or be integrated. We still have a lot of work to do. We need to keep going that way, but we need to do things better. We need to work together and have the same goal. Thank you. You'll have time to speak more on your point later. Thank you for these presentations. For the first round of questions, we'll have questions from each party. It's going to be a 5-minute round. Mr. Dalton is first. The floor is yours. Thank you very much to all witnesses. It was very interesting. I did face some technical issues, but I'm happy to be here online. My first question is for Miss Meggs from Quebec. For the first time, we have reached our 4.4 Francophone immigration target outside of Quebec. I would like to know what the situation is for Francophone immigrants in Quebec. Are we closer to reach targets? Are you facing any problems? Would you maybe speak more on that issue when it comes to Francophone immigration in Quebec? Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very important question. Recruitment was never easy. However, we were able to work with skilled workers, people who apply under this component get more points if they speak French. It allows the government to admit more people who speak French. We need to be careful when we talk about Francophone immigrants. The Auditor General in 2018 said that we needed to work on equity. Back then, we used to do interviews. We don't necessarily do it anymore. But they did mention how many points they would give to French speakers. They wanted to make language proficiency tests mandatory. For refugees, the situation is different. For family reunification, there is a very small proportion of French speakers. Temporary immigration has become a very good part of immigration in Quebec. Results are not as good, and there are no language requirements. There are only some requirements made by some institutions, for example, education institutions. This could create a problem. The pool for Francophone immigrants comes from the Francophone pool. Thank you very much. I would like to talk about students. I would like to talk about university students. I think anyone could answer this question. Students don't get accepted. First of all, they might not have enough money to live in Canada during their studies. I can understand. Here's the second reason why they're not accepted. After they go to school, they don't want to have to go back. I find it a little weird. It's weird because we want these students to keep on working on their schooling, but then they get rejected. I feel like this is confusing. I would like to get a few words from each witness. Ms. Sacco could start. and then go around the table. I would like to know what is the situation for students coming to Canada. Do you believe that the system works? Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I talked about why students wouldn't get student permits or visas to come here. I think that your question is related to both of these reasons. When students say that they want to stay in Canada, they believe that they are well aligned with the situation. But when they mention that they want to stay before coming here, they get refused. They also have to present a career plan after their studies. It could be a reason why they are refused. We ask them to present this plan. Thank you, Ms. Sacco. That's all the time we have. 6 minutes go by really fast. Let's go to Mr. Francis Drouin for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses. I'd like to start with the FCFA since you are here in person. Let's start talking about Canada. What are our immigration needs in Canada? Did the FCFA study what are the needs in terms of immigration in the minority French-speaking community? Is this something that we can see in our immigration policy? If Ms. Ashton was here today, I think that we could both advocate for people working in childcare, for example. I would like to understand what you hear from members all over Canada. Thank you, Mr. Drouin, for the question. It's a very interesting question. The FCFA studied the needs. Our community's prosperity is threatened by this decline. We need to maintain the demographic weight of our communities. It means that we need to have targeted measures. Here's what we need to understand. By making this analysis, we need to understand that the targets are very weak. We were able to reach the 4% last year. But we need to repeat what we said before. We need to make up for this target. I talked about it earlier in my speech. We didn't make these targets up. We used the tools we had to set these targets, and the goal is to make sure that we can reach these targets of Francophone immigration outside of Quebec. That way we would be able to save our communities. We aim to save communities that are threatened because of their low demographic weight. So what should we do? We need to have ambitious measures. We have tools available. We need to leverage these tools. For example, we need to implement an immigration program for Francophones outside of Quebec. That way, we could make sure that they're not stuck with other immigrants. This is a critical element. It's also very important to target skilled workers, but also to target other people. You mentioned childcare workers. We need these people. We can't rely only on express entry. We need to have programs that allow us to get these essential workers. I would like to ask a question to Ms. Saku. I like your comment on enhancing consular services. I'm interested by the situation in African countries in the last 20 years. Is this something you've been hearing from people in Africa? Is there a lack of service? Obviously, some embassies serve 16 countries. There are other consulates that cannot serve people. So people sometimes have to move there to get their application processed. So here's my question. Why would we have a consulate where we can't offer any consular services?
So maybe it's time to add consular services to these Francophone countries, and so that they can do broader recruitment in sub-Saharan Africa or in any other country. So perhaps you would need to review these consulates that are in Francophone African countries to give them, to build their capacity to provide consular services so that nationals don't have to spend fortunes to travel to another country just to seek a visa or seek a permit. So there is the Embassy of Canada in Senegal, for example, that serves many countries. And on service providers on the ground who work with potential immigrants, I am not able to know whether we have a good understanding about why, for example, study permits in Tunisia have a 73% acceptance rate, whereas in other countries the rates are much lower. And that obviously, well, I understand that a study permit can be refused just because we can't confirm a bank account. If the information was provided and there's an error, for me that is a waste of time for our immigration agents, because it's fraud. Because how do we ensure that the agencies on the ground bring us cases that are realistic and not wasting the time of officers? That's an excellent question, Mr. Drouin, but your time has lapsed. You can maybe come back to it later. For the Bloc, our second vice chair, Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Ms. Meggs. You said that there are policies and federal decisions that harm Quebec's creativity in potentially attracting Francophone immigrants to Quebec. Can you give us examples of the main factors at play here? May I jump in? Yes, we can hear you. We don't hear. You're on mute, Madam Meggs. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll just make sure I have the list that I have for you. Yes, we just talked about one of the sectors is the refusal of study permits and other permits, visitor and permits from Africa, and in particular Francophone Africa, but from Africa in general. There is also the fact that there is the program to normalize temporary workers, which was a program that was announced, or it will be announced soon, and it wanted to normalize people with temporary status. It didn't apply to Quebec because Quebec it manages its own, but there is a cap for general immigration, but no cap for Francophone immigration, which could have meant that attracting Francophones in Quebec could move outside of Quebec for their permanent residency. Same type of thing. There were privileges created for employers outside of Quebec who are hiring Francophone immigrants. It doesn't apply to Francophones in Quebec, but it might not be a bad idea. Temporary immigration is a challenge now in terms of finding permanent Francophone immigration, but also the fact that the federal government fees have not changed for people who were selected for Quebec, but the only work that they have to do is to check their health file and criminal record, and they don't have to deal with their record. It's already processed by Quebec, but the fees for the federal government for a family of 4 for permanent residency are up to $3,230. So in Quebec, it's less, but they need to pay twice as high for their second application to the federal government. And all that to say that even Quebec has calculated its cost for processing a permanent residency, and it costs $1,115. So it's not reasonable to require the same fees for people who are already selected for Quebec who are missing permanent residency as for immigrants elsewhere in the country. So it's one of the examples that I would give of how, in addition to the challenges of the fact that there are 2 governments handling these requests, there are policies that add to the problem, and based on what I have understood of C-13 and certainly of the agreement, Canada-Quebec Agreement on Immigration, that should be avoided as much as possible. Thank you. You're saying that the federal approach could harm objectives outside of Quebec, but goes against the spirit of Bill C-13, but the objectives of the Canada-Quebec Agreement. Can you tell us more about that? Well, as I said, it was a matter of we need Francophone immigrants all across Canada. That's my point. The number of Francophone drops in Quebec, it drops everywhere across Canada. There's quite a bit of interprovincial migration already. We don't need to encourage it, but it's already happening. And so that means that the Canada-Quebec Agreement is an example of where it was recognized the asymmetry in the linguistic context 50 years ago. It was clear with this agreement and agreements that preceded it that the federal government recognized that French needed protection in Quebec. So that's why now with the addition of C-13, Canada shouldn't add or undertake policies that undermine this objective to protect French in all provinces. And one last quick question for the FCFA. Did you see the impact of Francophone assimilation into English in this context? Does Francophone immigration, does the rate of assimilation continue to increase? That's an excellent question, Mr. Beaulieu, but your 6 minutes is up. Mr. Bouleris, I'm sorry? Inaudible for the interpreter. Mr. Jones.
On the Hill, so it's your time. It's your turn for 6 minutes.
It's a huge honor to be joining you at this committee, especially with such an important conversation. First, I want to thank the witnesses for your conversation. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Mehuloko. Can you speak about British Columbia right now, my home province, has the 5th largest Francophone community. We're competing with 4th right now, but can you speak about what better supports need to be in place to support immigrants, but also the challenges in ensuring that British Columbia maintains that level, the Francophone community, and ensuring that immigration also gets as far west as British Columbia, because we know that's a huge challenge for the Francophone community and for British Columbians in general to ensure that we maintain that level Francophone?
Merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much for the excellent question. The issue of BC is one that the FCFA follows with great interest. Currently, there are a number of decisions that were made on the matter, but I will give the floor to my executive director, Mr. Alain Dupuis, to raise a number of issues about that. I would say that the challenge that we have in BC is that the province is the one that has to select more Francophones in the provincial candidates program, because most immigrants in that province, most Francophone candidates are selected by the province, and most federal immigrants still choose Ontario and Quebec in general. So it's a conversation that needs to be had between two levels of government, but certainly the federal government should reflect on how, when it welcomes immigrants, it ensures that they settle across the country, that we just don't have, that Francophone immigration doesn't just benefit Ontario and New Brunswick. So there is work to be done, and there's a reflection to be done on the selection at the federal level and ensure that immigrants settle across the country, and there's work to be done at the provincial level as well. And could the federal government also encourage the provinces to ensure that that selection is made at all levels of government? Thank you.
Ms. Ms. Sacco, can you speak about what the federal government is doing to support the operations within Aki, Manitoba, and other settlement services? Sorry, Ms. Sacco. Ms. Sacco. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. The federal government and the provincial government are very involved in the resettlement of immigrants that arrive here. There are also refugees who are part of the newcomer group. So funding by Immigration Canada funds resettlement services for conventional refugees, and in part some programs for refugees who come through the private sector. So there are resettlement services that help them settle in the community, find transitional housing, have support for permanent housing. Are also many sectors that are funded through the federal government, like employment services, health services, cultural services, and for early childhood as well. The government of Manitoba is also very involved and funds resettlement services for immigrants who are settling, but that's not enough. When we talk about programs specifically for Francophones, we need by and for, and we are in an Anglophone province where we know that assimilation is a big factor. So we want to have a type of equity in terms of resettlement services, and that it be by and for Francophones, and that it be managed by Francophone organizations to specifically help Francophone immigrants who have a huge challenge in official language minority communities like Manitoba, because the language challenge is real. So when they arrive in their integration process, they are required there are language courses, and it sort of forces their integration, and it extends their integration because.
Now, 85% of immigrants from Africa who settled in Manitoba between 2011 and 2021 reported English as their first official language spoken, but only 8% reported French as their first official language. What are the long-term consequences for Francophone immigrants, for Canadian society in general, if the government's investment in settlement services does not increase? This is for Ms. Sacco again.
That question was for me as well? Okay. So the impact is, if they're not better funded, is that it's a discouraging. Our objective is to build a link between Francophonie, because a lot of effort is focused outside to recruit Francophones so that they can come strengthen the demographic weight in OLMCs. So when they arrive and we see that the language is a problem, we see that, thank you. Thank you, Madame Sacco. I know 6 minutes goes by quickly, but we have to give everyone a chance. The next question, the next round is 5 minutes, starting with Madame Gladu. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for joining us today. I will start with Madame Abdiada. You know the situation with services for Francophones across Canada. Where is the biggest problem? What is the situation on the ground? Thank you very much. Well, I'll speak in terms of economic integration because that's my expertise. The services that we offer are basic services. It's really how to do a resume and basic things. When immigrants, and I'm talking about the different integration challenges, we talk about skills recognition, finding a job, we're not able to offer more precise services because we are limited in terms of funding. I'll also give you the example. When we talk about economic integration, there's all of the work that's done with employees at the upstream. When we want someone to find a job when they arrive, that's where we're missing the boat, because we're bringing people who are skilled, but they need to work in their fields of expertise. They need to work in the field they were trained in. And we ask them, are you working in the field that you're trained in? And I would say that 90% of them say that they don't. So it's a type of waste. So how do we ensure that we are not funded to work with employers? All of the work that is done upstream with employers and companies to ensure that they have job offers and that they're twinned, those are nearly free services. And we have said, yes, let's do economic integration, but economic integration is just not resumes and giving them a bit of information on the job market. It's to accompany them farther in their path and to connect them with employers and to work with employers in Canada so that they hire these Francophone immigrants. So there's a lot of work that can be done on that because we have a real problem. Many of our businesses who are close to retiring, and there needs to be a recovery. We need to rebuild and ensure that we support our entrepreneurial system in Canada. Thank you.
Sacco, when you talked about increasing consular services abroad, you also said we should get rid of the arbitrary criteria. Can you tell us what the arbitrary criteria you think are? You're on mute.
Désolée.
I'm sorry. The arbitrary criteria, I think I spoke about two. There was a criteria that said with students who wanted to return to their country, or there was students who wanted to stay in Canada and they were refused. They need to have a career plan, and if the plan was unclear, they could be rejected. So sometimes they may just say that they're not convinced by the file, and they decide to refuse it. So convinced, what does that mean? That they don't have financial means? That they don't like their photo? Does that mean that the form was filled out incorrectly? So there's this type of arbitrary refusal that is not justified and that really falls in a type of systematic rejection. The system rejects them and they have no idea about why there was this arbitrary rejection. And it could be much more clear if there was a possibility for appeal or review. If they could prove that they have the financial means, that they have enough financial means to make the file work. But this criteria does not apply to all clients, and the file is rejected arbitrarily. 30 seconds. Yes. Madame Meggs, you spoke about initiatives in Quebec to increase Francophone immigration. Can you provide a couple of examples? Well, Quebec announced recently that it will make knowledge of French a requirement for all categories. That means that they will have to know French before they are selected by Quebec as immigrants, and the levels will be confirmed through linguistic check. Thank you, Madame Meggs. I know this time it's five minutes. Perhaps you can come back with other questions. Mr. Daryl Sanson for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those who are with us today to help us to develop Francophone immigration in Canada. I'm going to begin with my friend Rukia. We actually spent some time together. Speaking of recruitment, this is referring to my past. But my first question is, you know that the government invested $4.1 billion to support the Official Languages Act so that it be an act that will really support development on the ground. And there are 4 pillars to this immigration plan. So how will this investment and this plan help organizations increase Francophone immigration and help them to retain these immigrants in Canada and throughout the provinces outside of Quebec? Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. Nice to speak to you again. So I think that the new investments will be very helpful in terms of international recruitment because there will be a fund earmarked for that. I think it's about $25 million over 5 years. And so this will help us a lot because, like I said, we would like to implement a targeted recruitment strategy. So looking for applicants in countries where we can find the expertise that Canada needs in accordance with employers' needs and each province's labor needs. I like Destination Canada that you mentioned. We need to keep working on Destination Canada, but we can use different recruitment pools and really use these skills from candidates and match them up with employment needs in our provinces. You spoke of the number of applicants that settle in Canada and go outside of Quebec. Majoritarily, they go out to Ontario. So the majority in Ontario and a remaining 40% in other provinces. And so this means we do not have many Francophones in many communities outside of Ontario, and those that are there do not necessarily correspond to the labor market needs. And so we need people on the ground, and we need to be working with employers as well. So I think we need targeted recruitment in partnership with employers. And then there's also the aspect of Francophone immigration policy that needs to be developed and strengthening settlement services. Like I said, I think we need to go beyond the basic services offered by Francophone settlement. It needs to be specialized to meet the specific needs of our applicants. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing what changes will be made in the near future on the ground. My next question will be for my colleagues with ACFA. So thank you for what you said, for thanking us for our work, but I think we're the ones who need to be thanking you for all that you've done. And thank you for your speech. It's really helpful for us to move forward on this question. So the question that I wanted to ask you, let me just find it. I had a great question for you. So we met the 4.4% target. What do you think we did differently, briefly, in your opinion, to meet this 4.4% target compared to the conservative government of the last 25 years who didn't succeed? What was done differently? So that's an excellent question, Mr. Sanson. We asked this question to the Minister of Immigration to see if there was a new formula that was used to meet these goals. 4.4% is an objective that we met, but it is not enough. We need to do better, and I think that all stakeholders have already said it. We need to take another look at our recruitment pools, and we need to be more innovative in the measures that we're taking. And especially, we need to have much bolder targets. So we're going to have to keep working to find that special formula, you could say. But we're off to a good start. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. It's already been 5 minutes. I know it goes by very quickly. The next two questions will be for 2.5 minutes each. We'll start with Mr. Beaulieu. The floor is yours. So I'd like to leave my colleagues from the FCFA the time to answer. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. So yes, I was saying we have met the 4.4% target. What did we do better? Well, we reduced waiting lists. But one thing's for sure, were we innovative? Did we go beyond expectations? When I look at this 4.4% target, I was a journalist a long time ago when we actually established the target. And I'm, of course, very happy that we met it. And I was actually there the day that it was announced. But in terms of integration, language transfers, Francophone newcomers, have you taken these factors into account? Yes, I have. Coming back to the question that you asked earlier, Mr. Beaulieu, you asked if we take into account the assimilation factor. Assimilation is a reality, but there are other realities too. For example, I am here in front of you. I have 2 children who are French-speaking, born in Ontario, and who speak French. And so the reality of living in French still exists in our communities. Yes, there is assimilation, but the vitality of this community still exists. So I know that with anecdotes, we each have our own opinions. I'm looking more for facts. Well, these are facts too. Yes, but I'm looking at, percentages, transfers, for example, newcomers who are living in English. We're looking at around 42% of these immigrants who are being assimilated to English, and this continues to increase. And so I think that this is something that we need to take into account. 30 seconds. And then if we're not looking into where these newcomers are living, it's a problem, because if they arrive somewhere where there's no French-speaking services, I think it's difficult to imagine that they'll continue to live in French and really integrate into a French-speaking environment. Thank you for the questions. Less than 5 seconds left. I would say that it is a challenge, but if we don't have immigration, then we won't have this French-speaking variety. We won't be renewing this immigration pool. So, yes, I think we do still need to send French speakers to these communities. Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, 2.5 minutes.
Can you identify which sub-Saharan countries you think we need additional consular services in? And maybe can you also tell us about the challenges immigrants face when it comes to or have with their immigration processes, and maybe add to do long wait times influence the decision of immigrants to immigrate to Canada?
Thank you. So I will briefly identify some questions. I do not have an exhaustive list with me, but if we look at French-speaking countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there's the Ivory Coast, Senegal, Cameroon, Guinea, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, for example. All these countries don't have the necessary capacity to offer consular services, and so they all work through Dakar. And so the problem is with accessibility to embassies and Canadian consular services. It's very difficult for immigrants. To go request services, it's often difficult. Sometimes they don't even know what number to call. These numbers are not always accessible. They don't have necessarily 1-800 numbers, so not everyone can call and ask questions about their application. And in terms of processing, it is very long with the consular services. There's no means to contact the consulate to see what's happening with your application. So it can take a long time. And oftentimes it's extremely difficult and drawn out. So accessibility is one thing, yes. And then also availability of services is another aspect. So when you're counting on an embassy in another country to get your visa or to, increase costs, sometimes fees are very expensive. And so it creates a lot of new challenges for migrants. Sometimes they have to wait 3 years to get, or even 4 years to get a response. Thank you very much, Ms. Sacco. Next two questions will be 5 minutes. We will begin with Mr. Bernard Genereux. The floor is yours. Hello to all our witnesses. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Sacco, I'm going to continue with what you were saying. You were speaking of... So I'm going to give you a bit of context. In Quebec right now, for example, we talked about how many African students are having their applications rejected. And you spoke of different countries. In your opinion, what would you suggest to improve services or to broaden consular services in certain regions, in certain African countries, to improve Canada's capacity to serve these people so that they can come here? Thank you. I think that, firstly, embassies need to work, like I said earlier in my presentation, they need to be working with communities. We need IRCC practices to be aligned with our Francophone immigration requirements. Like I stated, FCFA has stated this too. The community is working hard to promote immigration and recruit immigrants to come here. For consular services to be broadened throughout these countries, I don't think it's just on IRCC. There's also other departments that are involved in the process. So we need to look at where there is a lack of service provision. So when I looked at the Ivory Coast or Senegal, sometimes there are services that have been withdrawn or never existed. So we need to fill this gap so that people can access service directly in their country and will be able to have their applications processed there, or at least have a telephone line for them to call. Because again, sometimes they're waiting 2 to 3 years and they have no response. And they don't know who to contact to know what's going on. So that's an example of services that should be implemented to help these immigration pools in Africa. And we've seen this in the media. Quebec has spoken a lot of this. There is a problem with this system that is oftentimes systematically refusing these African students There are a lot of sub-Saharan African students who want to come to Canada. Ms. Sacco, I'll stop you just for a second because one of the reasons for refusal is the fact that students don't seem to be able to prove that they have the necessary funds to support themselves on top of their education costs when they come to Canada. So I actually have seen that they have proof of students who have $100,000 in their bank account in Africa, and they have written proof from a notary, and then they are rejected. So I can only imagine that it's an automatic response. I think we really need to understand how could this happen. We have a student with the support of their parents that is able to prove that they have $100,000 in their bank account, and yet the response that they receive is you are not financially capable to support yourself in coming here. Clearly, something's not working here. I'm not sure if anyone would like to add something to that. I know I don't have much time left. Yes, but we do also have a lot of proof of refusal because of the lack of financial means, and oftentimes they didn't actually verify those financial means. Sometimes they don't even look at the file. So I think we need an ombudsman's office, for example, that will look into this because there's no way to challenge the agent's decision. There's no means to verify that what the motives the agent gave are real. There's no means of recourse. And so I think we need to establish recourse services so people can challenge these arbitrary decisions, so at least we can take another look at their files. Sometimes they're going through federal agents. Sometimes they'll actually work with members of their family to actually challenge this case. And it's a very long and painful process. And it could be avoided simply by creating a service that allows people to challenge these decisions.
Merci, Madame Sacco.
Thank you, Ms. Sacco. The last question will be from Mr. Iacono. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank all witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Ms. Abden. What measures should the government put in place to make sure that we're attracting people? First of all, Canada is very attractive. I don't think that we necessarily need to promote immigration. A lot of people want to leave their country and go to Canada. However, we need to attract people that we want to welcome. In Canada, we have an immigration system that is based on the economy. So we're getting people so that they can live here, yes, but also so that they can work here. We have generalized labor needs. Sorry, Ms. Abden, I understand what you're saying. However, I'd like to know if there is a lack in terms of promotion. Would it be possible to accelerate the process? Because we know that everyone wants to come here, but not everyone can. How could we attract candidates that would be accepted more quickly because they check the boxes? I think that the result-based system that was just implemented is a good example. We need a system that will target people that have the skills that we need, but we also need to educate people in the countries where we promote about the needs. That way, people that we are looking for could want to apply to immigrate in Canada. They would know what skills we need in Canada. And we also need partnerships with other countries. There are other countries like Germany that have partnerships with other countries to attract people that have a specific skill set. Miss Meggs, could you talk about the most frequent pools for Francophone immigrants? How can we attract them to come to Canada? We need to target French-speaking countries, of course. We need to target people who can learn French quickly, for example, people who speak Spanish. We need to target people from Northern Africa because they were former French colonies. This is where we get the most requests. There is 30% of the immigration requests come from Northern Africa. There are some from Algeria, for example. So these are the people who want to come to Canada. But I would like to go back on temporary immigration. This is where we can find the immigration pool for permanent residency, and this is where we have problems regarding French. In the end, the employer will decide on which people they want, and they will choose English-speaking people. Thank you. Now, Ms. Sacco, I have a question for you. When people come to minority language communities, what are the biggest challenges they face? What are the challenges they face in order to participate in their community? These communities are currently facing important challenges. We need to see the big picture. We have to talk about credentials recognition. The selection process, be it from the provinces or via express entry, we get people that are skilled. These people are really skilled, but they're not able to work in their field. This is an important problem. Credentials are very problematic. Because of this, people need to change their integration goals. They have to work in other fields, and it might take them a longer time to fully integrate. Language programs need to be well structured. Let's take English learning, for example. It's a very important program for the Francophone minority. And there are programs, but they're not well prepared. Thank you, Ms. Sacco. I'm sorry. Here's what you can do. You can send us any information that you would like to share with the committee to our clerk if you believe that you have some important information. Don't hesitate to send it to us. Next week, we'll hear from other witnesses. We'll still talk about the increased Francophone immigration. Thank you to all the witnesses, and thank you, members of the committee. We are adjourned.